We are born free, and we will die free. The time in between, though, that's complicated. In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Oderman.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast network. Great to have you with me. If you're watching live, this is a Friday afternoon. For those listening to the audio, always good to have you listening along. Excited for today's guest. I think this is going to be a great discussion. And, I think it'll be an opportunity to learn more about maybe a topic that you might have some misconceptions about, or maybe you think you've made your opinion, but maybe you should potentially re-examine it. So we'll get into that in a minute. Before I do, I just want to talk about my friend Stephen Fox and his excellent coffee at Fox and Sons Coffee. It's how I start my day every morning. I just got a big bag of his espresso, which is called Ziggy Espresso. It's a delicious bean, and I like to make a cappuccino with it with our espresso machine. It's been awesome. So you can get 15% off an order of $40 or more by going to FoxN, that's the letter N, sons.com, and entering promo code John at checkout, and you'll get that discount applied. Okay. One more note, then we'll get into it. Just want to remind everyone, new show here that we have here on the Lions of Liberty Network, the Politics Podcast. That's TICK, spelled with a T-I-C-K, like the blood-sucking insect. So please go subscribe to that feed. It's a brand new feed. We're trying to grow it. Check it out. Great show. We have myself, Brian McWilliams, Lou Perez, and Brian Nichols on that show. So go subscribe. All right. Let's bring in today's guest, and he is Adam Swart. He is the founder of Crowds on Demand, which is the original paid protesting firm in the United States. He's a free speech absolutist, which I think a lot in the audience here will agree with that. He's worked on both the liberal and conservative side of the aisle. Adam has insider knowledge of how protests are coordinated, funded, and used to shape public perception, sometimes by foreign actors and elite donors. He's appeared on Fox News, Newsmax, NewsNation. I saw an awesome clip of him on with Cuomo pretty recently here that I think went pretty viral. So, Adam, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Happy Friday to you and your lovely audience here.
Yeah, great to have you here. And before we get into talking about, the topic for today, which is, I think, mostly going to be centered on paid protesting. What is it? It's really your expertise, your niche. I want to give my audience a chance to learn about you. What's your background? What makes you tick? What brought you into this space?
Sure. Well, I started this company in 2012, so that's 13 years ago when I was still in college. I've worked previously to starting Crowds on Demand. I'd worked, in addition to other odd jobs, on a lot of political campaigns, mostly actually on the Democratic side at that time, though I definitely consider myself an independent now. I don't give my adherence to any political party. Mm-hmm. But I worked on a lot of campaigns on the Democratic side in college, and one of the big challenges that I saw was turnout, right? Is a lot of these campaigns were being run by people who had come of age in a different generation, where thousands of people like in the 60s would turn out to basically anything. If there was free pot and maybe some pizza around, they would be there. And in an age dominated by millennials at the time, and now obviously Gen Z, the dynamics have shifted, and getting people out there is critical, because in order to have the context for a good speech, for a good rally, right, you have to have the people there, and they have to be enthusiastic, and they have to be the right kind of people. I mean, imagine the greatest speeches of all time, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech delivered in front of 10 people. It wouldn't have had the same resonance. So that was critical. So I got to thinking, when we were able to kind of gather these crowds, it was immensely impactful. And actually, by the way, more impactful than gathering people to rally was gathering people to demonstrate, right? So if we were able to kind of say, let's have 50 protesters outside the opposition candidate's rally of 1,000 people, right? We might be able to get equal media time when the media is covering the rally, even with 5% of the number of people, right? So it's actually really good value for kind of the resources that we deployed. But obviously, you don't get paid very well working on a political campaign. So I got to thinking, hey, what if we could actually use the power of that along with the power of kind of people, right? And people want to get out there and demonstrate, but they don't always have the kind of impetus to do so. So if we compensated people to demonstrate, that would be beneficial for those people as well as for the causes and candidates that they support. And we expanded from there. We do PR stunts. Crowds on Demand does PR stunts. We do, for companies, we do product launches. We do kind of business protests. We do advocacy campaigns. Kind of anything involving kind of publicity and people is kind of within our wheelhouse.
So let's dive right into it and start talking about this. Get into the messy details of it, right? And I'm not going to come at you like Chris Cuomo with gotcha questions and things like that. But the way I was kind of wrestling with the idea after watching some of your interviews and thinking about what I wanted to ask. I was kind of thinking back to, because one thing that you brought up with Cuomo was, he's paid also. When he was at CNN, he's being paid via advertising dollars, right? Yes. And a lot of those dollars, it's no secret, are coming from like pharmaceutical companies, which is influencing the opinions and how he's going to give his message across to the thousands or however many people watch CNN now. So that's that. Yeah, hundreds. So that's a form of influence, payment through influence, through advertising dollars, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and the way that I see protest is it is more akin to advertising than voting. I think the misnomer about protest is there's this idea of if 200 people come out to protest for one side of the issue and 50 people come against, then the people are 4-1 for that issue. A protest is not a perfect sampling of public opinion. It is a method to raise awareness about concerns. So it doesn't really matter how the protest comes about. It's a way to make sure your concerns are front and center, right? If you spend $5 to $10 million on a Super Bowl ad, for example, you are making sure that your message is heard. Now, in many cases, companies that spend that money on the Super Bowl ad make 50 times that in sales. And in some cases, it's a total flop. And what kind of impacts whether it's a success or a flop? It's whether their product ultimately resonates, right? The ad makes sure that people see it, but it still has to fly. And I look at protests kind of in the same way, is that protests make sure that people are paying attention. Right? If you have thousands of people in the street, the media is going to cover it. People are going to talk about it. People are going to see it. Right? Now you have people's attention. But if it's not a cause that resonates, it's just going to fizzle.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good way to put it. It really is, especially in this attention-dominated culture that we live in. It's a form of getting that attention, getting those eyeballs, getting that those viral videos to get in front of people. One thing that question that comes to mind to me immediately, and I'm sure a lot in the audience are thinking, John, asking about this. What about foreign influence? What about the Chinese or the Russians or Iran? People might bring something like that up. What about them coming in and buying up protests in order to influence the culture here in the United States?
By the way, that's illegal. So it does. I mean, first of all, it does happen, but it is illegal. So I just want to be clear. Like, part of why I just want to share with your audience, because a lot of people are saying, ask me, why are you going on the media to talk about it? Because this is such a sort of hidden world. And
that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
So part of why I'm doing this, so I want to get in front of that question, is number one, to disassociate myself with any form of illegal protests, right? So that is we wouldn't block law enforcement, we don't block roads without a permit, we don't, do violence or vandalism or anything like that. So there's a lot of misinformation that's been spread on the internet that we somehow have anything to do with riots or, law breaking or Antifa or whatever. Obviously we don't. So it's important to kind of come on there and say, hey, we absolutely don't have anything to do with that. When it comes to foreign influence, even if they were funding peaceful protests, that would be illegal, right? Even peaceful protests, if countries like Iran and Russia, my understanding is that would be illegal and we wouldn't take their money. As you can imagine, I mean, people reach out all over, all kinds of people reach out, including people with perhaps nefarious motives. It's my job, having been in business 13 years, to kind of parse through that and to kind of make sure that we're not taking on that sort of business.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's kind of like in the eye of, the beholder to a certain degree, right? I mean, just take a totally random example that jumped in my head. So you have now a part of Trump's big, beautiful bill, which I keep seeing in my social media feed. I follow a lot of people who are in the the hunting community, the fishing community, outdoors. And part of the big, beautiful bill, they want to sell some of the public land, right? So people are coming out against that. When you have an issue like that, and we don't know where the funding's coming from, right? People who are maybe on the side in favor of getting this public land and selling it, and people could come in and hedge funds and scoop it up and create these expensive condos that ruin a beautiful landscape. So how is the public supposed to navigate this when, sure, pretty much, I think when we see protests now, I think we all assume they're paid protests.
Of course, there's no such thing as an unpaid protest, by the way.
Can you expand on that?
Well, there's no such thing. Everybody is being paid in one way or another. So if you're not getting paid in cash, you're getting paid some other way. You're getting incentivized. It's what I call incentivized activism. All activism is incentivized. So think about the guys who protested in the 60s, right? Vietnam, Woodstock, or whatever, right? I mean, a vast majority of those people were just there to smoke pot and get laid, right? I mean, they literally were there to go get laid, smoke weed, and chill, right? Vietnam was secondary, right? Vietnam was secondary. If you think about the BLM manifestations, right? A lot of you think the Real Housewives of New York, there's a Real Housewife of New York, of Orange County, and there's Real Housewives of New York, who are out there protesting. You think they know anything about institutionalized racism? I mean, give me an effing break, right? Like, they're there for the gram, right? They're there. So what I'm saying is, yes, I provide people cash compensation, but there are other forms of compensation. So social media credit is one. Labor unions are infamous for essentially giving people good shifts who essentially go to the protests and go to their events, and bad shifts for people who don't, right? A lot of protests that you see, by the way, or rallies, are actually staffed by campaign workers on both sides, right? So if you're a member of the legislative staff for the assembly, the kind of state legislature, right? Maybe you work 9 to 5 doing that, but if there's some rally, you're expected to attend, right? You're not legally obliged to attend, but believe me, you want to be attending those things. And if you don't, you won't get promoted. And that goes for both Republican and Democrats. So what I'm saying is almost everyone out there rallying has some reason to be there that isn't purely, this is my belief on the issue, right? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying people kind of sully this idea of getting compensated as if that impugns the motivation, when I think when you're talking about someone who's getting paid a couple $100, few $100 to attend an event, right? Most of the people, I mean, I'm going to ask your audience a question. If someone offered you a few $100 to go to a protest that you disagreed with, right? If you're MAGA and someone offered you a few $100 to go to a BLM rally, would you do it? I'm thinking most of your audience would say no.
Right. Yeah. I would agree with that.
So I think there's this idea that money somehow sullies protesting, when number one, it's there already, and number two, it's we're all incentivized in some way, and number three, it's like I think money has a limited capacity. I mean, sure, if someone paid you $1 million, you'd probably go to any rally that they want, right? But generally speaking, you're not going to do that. So so I think all rallies are essentially paid rallies. So I kind of object to this idea that there's some sort of distinction of, oh, this is a grassroots protest, oh, this is an AstroTurf protest. I mean, but back to your example, I mean, that's exactly kind of issue you're talking about, the land matter in the big bill, right? That's exactly the kind of thing that we might be hired by one side or another to do, right? Is to basically push on different provisions and say, hey, stop this land sale, right? So it's like hunters versus developers, right? Both sides are probably people who might have the ability to influence Trump, right? Because both the hunters and the developers are both kind of in the Trump camp.
That's really a split MAGA issue for sure.
Correct. So I would definitely say that would be a type of thing that we might be deploy protesters, phone banking, emailing, and all of that to push people on one side or the other on that issue. So that's kind of a great example.
So how about you talked about foreign money, accepting foreign money? It's illegal. You don't do it.
No.
Billionaires, big money, people with a lot of money coming to you. How do you have like an internal process to vet and decide on who you want to accept dollars from?
Well, the internal process is me. I'm the one who gets to ultimately decide. So we don't have I think a lot of these ethics review boards, like Facebook started one, it's total bullshit, right? That's just window dressing for the fact that they want a board that's going to tell them to do unethical things.
They're just trying to prevent lawsuits.
Right, exactly. That's to cover CYA board, right? Cover your, what, right? So I think I have something much better, which is my 13 years in the business. I can have a pretty good sense of, are your motives good and are your motives bad? Number one. Number two, I've got enough money. I don't need to work. Like, I'm not out there trying to take every single gig. Now, of course, every person who contacts me can rest assured that their information will remain private. So even if I say, hey, look, I don't want to take this on for whatever reason, your information is safe with us, right? Because I wouldn't have been in business this long if people felt like their information would get leaked, right? So your information is safe, but I think I assess campaigns for a couple things. Number one, does the budget meet the ambition, right? So a lot of times somebody might have a healthy budget, but it's still not enough to get what they're looking done, right? Like if you're trying to stop a bill in Congress and you have a $50,000 budget, that's probably not going to get it done, right? Because it's a fairly large undertaking. But number two, I would say that part of it is understanding, okay, is this advancing like kind of a common sense side of an issue that we think will ultimately be successful? And if we are successful, are we going to make the country a better place, or at least not make the country a worse place, right? So I do assess those things when I determine whether to take something on. And one third factor is, am I putting protesters at risk? So for example, this recent stuff with ICE, right? Regardless of your opinions on ICE one way or the other, I think there's some concern with that if you have people holding peaceful signs, but then right next to that is a guy throwing a Molotov cocktail, you're kind of putting people at risk, both from the sort of thugs who are throwing the Molotov cocktail because they're very unstable people. And second is from the authorities is how do the authorities distinguish if you have one guy holding a sign and one throwing a Molotov cocktail, but they're both kind of next to each other?
Guilt by association, for sure. Yeah.
Well, correct. And by the way, I object to that. Like, you're a libertarian. I kind of have a very libertarian notion on this. I think, number one, you should never be judged by the content of your ideas, only by the actions, right? So if you vandalize a building, you should go to jail. If you hurt someone, you should go to jail for a very long time, right? If you trespass, you should be punished, right? But it doesn't matter whether any of those things are furthering, neo-Nazi cause, BLM cause, MAGA cause, whatever. It doesn't matter because we have freedom of speech. And I'm tired of the sort of politicized prosecution of from both sides of like, we're going to prosecute this one harshly because we find the ideas offensive as opposed to the actions offensive, right? So so I think that's an important distinction.
So when we talk about free speech in this country, I think people kind of, maybe correctly or incorrectly, correlate freedom of speech to kind of being free of manipulation in any way. So what are your thoughts on the line between, or is there a line between free speech, which would be, just free speech that is not influenced in any way, or a paid protest? Or do you think that it's all just encompassed within, the sphere of freedom of speech?
Well, if you think paid protest is manipulation, what do you think of advertising? So I guess we should just ban all advertising. Oh, well, we should also ban product placement in television. I don't know. Like why the hell do I see a Buick in a TV show? No one drives a freaking Buick, right?
I haven't seen a Buick on the road in 25 years.
Yeah, but I've seen it as product placement, right? So it's like, and they don't tell you that, right? So it's like, yeah, of course there's going. So, I mean, I guess my question to your libertarian audience is, we live in the United States of America. We are theoretically a capitalist country. So I don't think we want restrictions on freedom of speech in a capitalist country. I think people have to be savvy themselves. Now, I'm going to use the example that paying demonstrators, what it does is it catalyzes the movement, but it doesn't create a movement out of nothing. So I kind of disagree with the concept that it even does manipulate people. Again, even if it did manipulate people, it wouldn't be like, it's still freedom of speech. But I don't think it does manipulate people. And let me give you two examples. So the Tea Party, right? The Tea Party was founded essentially by the Koch brothers and other kind of right-wing billionaires, right? They funded it. They did a ton of money. And it started with these kind of fairly small demonstrations with these guys in like the Revolutionary War garb, like the tricolor.
I remember it.
Hats and all that, right? And then Fox News, conservative media really amplified it and it grew, right? Why did it grow? Is because it ultimately resonated with people. If the Kochs and the others hadn't funded it, no one would have ever seen it and it wouldn't have ever grown. But it was actually a movement that tapped into a lot of people's concerns, right? So the money and the protesters catalyzed the movement, but ultimately it grew because it resonated. Conversely, remember a gentleman by the name of John Ellis Bush, otherwise known as Jeb Bush. He ran for president.
Please clap. Please clap. Please clap.
Please clap. And people didn't clap because it wasn't a very good message, right? I think they put about $200 million into his campaign, and it was a total flop. Now, what did the $200 million buy, Jeff? It bought him name recognition. I don't think a single Republican primary voter did not know who he was. They knew who he was. They decided not to vote for him, right? So the money gets you the attention, but you ultimately then have to resonate, right? So what I would say is what Crowds on Demand does is not manipulation, because what we do is catalyze. Now, of course, one thing that's unfortunate is not everybody can afford to fund the catalytic movement for their cause, right? So if you don't have money, you're unable to catalyze. So, but that's, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of like saying, well, I could have started Apple or I could have started Uber if somebody had given me whatever the millions of dollars that those companies started with. Like, yeah, that's true. So of course money gives you the ability to start and catalyze movements, but it's not manipulation, because these movements ultimately have to grow or they're going to end up as jebs, right? So we've run a lot of campaigns, we've run a lot of tea parties, but we've also run some jebs, right? And so that's why it's not manipulation, because at the end of the day, some campaigns, you're funding things and you get a lot of attention, but ultimately it's a jeb because it doesn't resonate with people for whatever reason.
Yeah. And you've brought up libertarians and libertarian ideas, and of course, there's a lot of libertarian listeners to this show. And I do still consider myself a libertarian. I agree with a lot of the ideas. I'm not a member of the party anymore, but I think sort of a problem that libertarians have talking about making ideas popular, right? A slogan of libertarians is, "We want to take over the government, then leave you alone." And a lot of libertarians think, "Oh, people are going to love this." What they don't realize is people don't want to be left alone. People want things from the government.
Sure.
People want services and different things.
Get your government hands off my Medicare.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a message that sells. It's not a message that lands with a massive portion of the public.
Full libertarianism, not full libertarian. I think the American people generally like libertarians and respect libertarians, but full-throated libertarianism simply doesn't work. And one example of why, and feel free, libertarians, to hate me for saying this, but go to a nation called Lebanon, but it's not really a nation. It's kind of a dysfunctional place. It's actually a beautiful country. Reminds me a lot of California. It's got beautiful beaches, beautiful mountains, delicious food, great wine, educated people, right? It has, in theory, all the fundamentals of like a great country. But they have no functioning government. And a few years ago, I guess people kind of affiliated with a group called Hezbollah, right? And kind of terrorist groups were, I guess, collecting various like munitions and other kind of like very explosive devices at a place near the port of Beirut. And essentially, there was no port regulator or port manager or government agency overseeing that these devices, these materials were actually a safety risk, as would be the case in a functioning country. So as a result, there was this massive explosion
I remember
in the port of Beirut that killed thousands of people, injured people, created complete chaos in the city. Why did this happen? Is because had there been a regulatory body saying, hey, we are responsible for managing what is stored in the port, they would have said, no, you absolutely cannot store these materials. This is essentially a disaster in the making. But they had no functioning government, so they had no ability to essentially there was no agency that did this. So this is the result of kind of libertarianism in the sort of nth degree. I mean, if you want power in Lebanon, you better bribe the head of the power company, or you better have your own generator, right? The roads don't work, right? The water is unclean. You have to have your own, like the things that we take for granted that the government does, they don't do, right? So it actually makes you realize, wow, I think a lot of libertarians take a lot of what the government does for granted and then says, okay, the government overreaches in certain areas. I think they're right. So I think libertarians are a very important part of the political ecosystem. But if they were left to run the show, it would end up looking like Lebanon.
I don't even know if I want to get into the philosophical debate on some of those things, but I don't. It's not like I wholly disagree with you. It really, any of it. I will say this. So another example, and maybe more current than the explosion in Beirut, for talking about libertarian ideas and them not working. Just look at our food supply and
Yeah.
how a lot of people, you can point to the FDA's regulation and missing the mark in a lot of ways, but corporations also, it's their decision what they put in their food. And
Yeah.
they've essentially been poisoning people for
Oh, yes.
decades by
Yes.
putting dyes and artificial junk in there and all kinds of crap, processed junk. It's essentially slowly poisoning the American public. And in
Yes.
other countries, like in Canada and in Europe, where they have some loose regulations preventing, red dye and these different things, they've just taken it out and replaced it with natural dyes. It took like 2 months with RFK coming in as the head of HHS, saying it was voluntary. He just encouraged corporations to take the dyes out of food, and many of these megacorps have done it within like a few weeks. And
Correct.
it's going to be so. It's yeah. I mean, there does need to be a little bit of a nudge, I think, in some of these
Where
areas.
the government is things where people can't realistically be expected to know everything, right?
Mhm.
So in a true libertarian country, we would essentially be expected to know everything. Like I should just be able to go to a restaurant and not look at its health rating. I should just be able to know that I'm not going to get poisoned from this restaurant, right? So there's a lot that we take for granted in America, even as our regulators are corrupt and imperfect and kind of useless in certain ways. They still give us a lot that we take for granted. And
Mhm.
as you said, like the red dye is kind of a good example where I think it's too much to ask that consumers look at those things. I mean, of course, in an ideal world, in kind of a
Course, yeah.
libertarian world, people could basically say, well, I'm not going to buy
Right.
stuff with red dye. And then the companies might themselves decide to stop selling the red dye, right? The problem is a vast majority of consumers are just not savvy enough to make that decision, but ultimately that stuff is killing them.
Yeah.
So it is this balance between a nanny state where like we have to get somewhere between like the Michael Bloomberg no big sodas, where it's like, okay, if somebody wants to be a fat ass and drink like a giant Coca-Cola and drink it like it's water, like maybe they should be allowed to do it, but at least they should know what they're drinking.
Yeah. And then like the next level is, sure, an adult, yeah, if they want to drink red dye or whatever, or smoke cigarettes or do drugs, sure, do it. But
They have to
then
be
giving that to a child, I mean, yeah, that
yeah,
kind of changes things up a little bit. One more question for you. I do want to come back to paid protests.
sure.
Um, so could you just take us through just like the framework of how this works? Where are the people found when a given cause is identified? That there's money backing it. There's funders backing it.
Mhm.
How are the people found who go to the protests? And what are the you don't have to get in specifics or anything. What are the general logistics around it?
Well, general logistics, right? So we always at Crowds on Demand, we only do people who are passionate about the subject matter, right? So if we are staffing, let's just say an environmentalist protest, we're going to have people who are passionate about the environment. If it's a women's issue, we're going to have people who are passionate about women's issues, right? So ideally, as much as possible with personal experience. So if we can, because they're going to be more effective spokespeople, right? So we have been in business 13 years, so we have a lot of people we rely on who we know are interested in certain causes all across the country. But in addition to those people, we will proactively reach out to certain people who we might not know or might not have worked with to work with us on certain things as well. So the way I look at it is we're kind of a casting agent in certain ways, and in certain ways we have our own network. So it's kind of like the same way like maybe the casting agency already has somebody who can fill the
Mhm.
role, and sometimes it's bringing someone new, but again, all that are passionate about the cause. So we'll kind of identify who we want for the crowd. We get the crowd together. We kind of work typically with the client on the talking points for the signs. No, I will say in some cases the client basically says, hey, here's the budget, just do run a campaign on this subject. and we trust your expertise. And in some cases, the client wants to manage every little piece of it. So it just depends on the specifics there.
I bet that can be a real pain in the what if the client wants to manage every piece of it for you. But
well, I used to think that, but it's interesting. Sometimes the client does that because they're micromanaging and they're not making the best decisions. But in some cases, I try to respect that the client might understand the intricacies of an issue better than me, right? Like I've had clients who've contacted me about disputes with yacht brokers, for example. And that was initially, I'm actually experienced in the yacht broker industry now, not personally, but from my protest experience. But at the time, I was like, well, I don't exactly know how this works. So maybe you tell me who is responsible for making the decision. So one thing I try to do personally, and one big value add, though, that I will say that I provide to our clients is I'm pretty good at trying to identify who is in a position to get you what you want, right? So if you're doing a protest, one of the dumbest things that people do when they're protesting is they don't protest the person or the group of people who actually are empowered to get what they want, right? So it's like, have you seen those videos on the internet of people screaming at a customer service agent at the airport because their flight is delayed, as if that customer service agent has anything to do with your flight being delayed, right? Like you should be screaming at the CEO of the company for scheduling the flight so tightly that the flight got canceled or whatever, right? So what I try to do is I try to identify, okay, you're concerned about this, right? So like, I'll even use your example of the land management issue. Like you're concerned about this. Who are the people who are actually swing votes on this land issue? Who is empowered? Who might be able to influence the land issue one way or the other, right? To put that in the bill or take that out of the bill. So instead of just going to the White House and protesting, maybe we identify, hey, these 10 representatives could potentially be influenced on this issue, and let's protest these 10 representatives. So my job is to try to first nail down who we actually go to, and then that really helps inform what we do. And it can also save our clients a ton of money, because someone might be like, oh, we need to protest every single member of Congress. Well, that's going to be really expensive. If we can figure out the 5 or 10 who actually might be influenced one way or the other, we'll just protest them.
Yeah. And especially that issue, the more I think about it, that is one that it's not only that the land development issue, public lands issue, it's not only just a MAGA issue split, it's also left, right. I mean, there's, plenty on the left that could swing either way on that.
Yes.
That would be an interesting one to dig into, because I'm sure that's one area I continue to see it more and more and more in my social feed. So I think it's something that's starting to bubble up. Maybe we'll see some paid protests around it here soon.
Well, again, all protests are paid protests, as I say. So I don't like when people, I always have to say that when you'll see protests, because all protests are paid protests, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think, I think that's a realization that I've come to, not only through this conversation, I think, but before we've even had this conversation here today. It's just where we are in the evolution of our society, our democracy.
It's nothing has actually changed. It's just that people are aware that I think my kind of advice to people is don't be kind of depressed as to the state of the world, but rather be kind of accepting of, hey, of course, a lot of groups are trying to influence you. And crowds on demand and protesting is one tool of influence, right? Just like advertising, just like campaign expenditure, just like door knocking, and those texts that you receive, and the calls that you receive, and the letters that you receive. And everyone is trying to sort of raise awareness right now. And we provide one major avenue of raising awareness. But I think what people should take from protests, just like they take from ads, is this a good cause or is this a bad cause? And that's why I always try at Crowds on Demand to make sure that everyone that we have is a good advocate for the cause, so that unlike, I mean, I'm sure you saw this video of this like kind of hippie trust fund looking kid like blocking traffic, and there's this like black lady who says she's a single mom who's trying to get to work, and he's like, dude, like, work, what is that? Like, and he's like blocking her from getting to work
Mhm.
on account of this ICE thing, right? And it's like, well, you're not doing a good job. I mean, black women vote Democrat 90%, right? And you just made that lady more sympathetic to the Trump side of things, right? So you're potentially alienating people who are probably statistically, a black woman living in New York is probably 85-90% likely to vote Democrat, and you might have made her more likely to actually support the Republican Party, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you're actually doing a disservice. So at the ultimately, what I want is the opposite. Is I want to use protests as a way to convince people, not to turn people off.
Yeah. And as you've said earlier, you don't block roads, any of that stuff, without permits, anything like that. I've never understood why anybody thinks blocking people trying to get anywhere, to work, to go on vacation is good for their cause. It's just never going to help anybody. It's a terrible
No,
idea for any protest.
it's not, and it happens to be illegal, and we also happen to live in a country where we have the right to speak freely legally. So I feel like when people engage in violence or vandalism or property destruction, whatever, in furtherance of a cause, it's like it's actually discourteous, because we actually live in a country where freedom of expression is a basic right and a constitutional right. So we don't need to engage in law breaking to make our voices heard.
Yeah. Adam, you've been very generous with your time today. I do appreciate it. If you could just give my audience, your plugs, where they can find any more of your content, more about Crowds on Demand, all that stuff.
Sure. Well, my Twitter/X handle is at CEO Adam Swart, and website crowdsondemand.com. Feel free to reach out. I actually love working with libertarians, because libertarians are fun. Like, let's be real. They party, they enjoy life. They're not woke, but they're not also like purists on the right side. So I honestly really like working with libertarians. We've worked with a lot of libertarian causes over the years, and so happy to take your business, but also most importantly, the reason I'm doing this show is at least that you understand at least my view on the ethics of what we do, and my kind of complete disassociation from the craziness that you're seeing. So if people get two things, is number one, my perspective on the ethics, and number two, that we're not at all associated with any of that stuff. So if people say, oh, Crowds on Demand's part of the riots, just please say we're not.
I think it's a smart PR strategy. Adam, thanks for coming on the show.
John, pleasure being with you. Have a good Friday.
All right, guys, that is a wrap for today's episode of Finding Freedom here on the Lions of Liberty Network. Of course, if you want to join our Lions of Liberty Pride and get access to bonus content and a bunch of other good stuff, please find us on Patreon or on Locals and join. We'd love to have you. We got a lot of great stuff coming down the pike. So check it out. And I'll just plug it one more time. The Politics Podcast, politics spelled with a tick like the blood-sucking insect at the end. Please go subscribe to the feed. We'll have a new episode next week. All right, that's a wrap. I'll see y'all next week. In the meantime, always remember to keep your head up and those fires of liberty burning.